Story 1. I don't post too often, but I've read through a lot of these posts, and it sparked an encounter I had years ago while on a solo bike tour. It was the spring after I graduated college. I was a 22-year-old female and didn't know what to do with my life, so I decided to take a pause and ride my bike down the coast from Canada to Mexico. I was pretty nervous to be going by myself, but for the majority of the time, I felt pretty safe. Halfway through or so, I got pretty comfortable sleeping alone in fairly empty campsites and parks. There were even some stretches on the road where I rode with other bike tourists. This one encounter, however, brought my guard back up for the remainder of the trip. I was halfway down the Oregon coast, about a mile or so out from the campground I had planned to stay at for the night. There was this notable yellow vintage Ferrari or some kind of car that passed me heading in the opposite direction. When I pulled into the campground, I stopped at the information board to look at the map and the fees. As I'm sitting there, I see the yellow car coming down the road, and it stops where I am. This older guy, in his late 50s or early 60s, gets out and starts looking at the board with me. He's friendly and seems completely normal, charismatic even. He's asking me about my trip and starts mentioning how he's from the area but has never checked out this campground. At this point, I'm still pretty naive. There are plenty of nice people I've met on this trip who chat me up and ask me about the bike tour. As he's talking to me, he's getting closer, and this is the part where I start to get uneasy. He would repeatedly reach out his hand to shake mine, like he was about to leave. But every time he shook my hand, he would grab my forearm with his other hand and do this weird gasping laugh thing. I don't know, the way he did it looked insane, and the arm grasp was very firm. It sent shivers down my spine. Then he dives into another topic and repeats this freaky handshake maybe 2 or 3 more times in between. I realize that I'm completely out of sight from anyone in the campground. I have no phone service, and I'm now very close to him and his open car door. There's a knot in my stomach. I'm on the verge of tears, and my voice is shaking with every response. At the time, I didn't know why, but something felt very off about this man. I finally speak up loudly, hoping someone else around me can hear, and tell him I gotta get going. I run to my bike and speed to the campground. Once I reach there, I don't even try to hike and bike the spots I had planned. I just throw my tent down directly across from the camp host. Again, I had a lot of encounters with random strangers at this point, but not even one of them terrified me like this one did. I toyed with the idea that he was probably just an overly friendly guy, but the fact that he would repeatedly grab my arm and laugh was frightening. All in all, most people I met were very sweet, and it made me very trusting of others. Even if he was harmless, his actions were a good reminder that I had to be mindful of my vulnerable situation and be much more alert. story too. I live in a city located inside a valley with a lot of smaller towns up the hills in the mountains around. So it's part of the local culture for teenagers and young adults to visit these smaller areas during the winter to drink, smoke weed, and basically just hang out with friends. My uncle bought a house in one of these areas, so eventually I decided to get the keys and spend a weekend there with 5 of my friends. The house had 2 big bedrooms with 3 beds in each and a lot of extra mattresses. That night, we decided at some point to go back inside, chill, and watch TV. Since the living room had no sofas yet, we brought some mattresses from the bedrooms and just used those. One of my friends, Victor, decided to go outside to smoke. After a few minutes, we heard someone knocking at the window just behind us. Everyone got kind of scared for a second, but then quickly realized it had to be Victor. Since we were sitting on mattresses close to the ground, it wasn't easy to see clearly who was at the window. The person just stood there looking straight at one of the girls, so I got up to check. I saw a man who looked a lot like my friend, but a bit more overweight and older. I quickly realized it was a stranger. I froze, staring at him, and he stared straight back at me. I finally said, "It's not Victor." Everyone else froze, and we all sat there, waiting for his reaction. All I could think to ask was what he wanted. He just stood there for a second and then asked, "There's a bar nearby. Do you need a drummer to play in your band? Is any of your friends a drummer by chance?" Oddly enough, I actually was a drummer, but I just told him no. He took a few extra long seconds just staring at us. Then he left. My friend came back, and we made fun of the situation, joking about how it messed with us. Later, most of the group decided to sleep in one bedroom and leave the second for me and one of the girls, since they saw us kissing earlier. We all went to bed. A few hours later, I woke up to the girl shaking me in horror, whispering that she heard something coming from the kitchen. I told her to lock the bedroom as I left to go check. I thought to myself, I'm that guy who dies first in a horror film. As I passed the second bedroom, I thought about calling out to someone to join me, but saw that they were all sleeping. I heard something at the kitchen window, so I moved in as silently as I could. Just as I was grabbing a knife to defend myself, I heard the door open right in front of me. It was the same man from earlier. For about 5 to 10 seconds, we both just stood and stared at each other, with him still holding the door handle. He made a slow movement with his other hand towards something under his shirt, which I assumed was probably a gun or a knife. I lifted my hand, showing him the knife, and he immediately stopped. The kitchen was small, so we were standing pretty close to one another. As our eyes locked, there was this unspoken agreement. We both knew it would end badly if he tried anything. I just shook my head and, as calmly as I could, whispered, "Don't." He kept staring at me a little longer, then finally shut the door and left. I breathed a sigh of relief, went back and told the girl it was nothing, and we should go back to bed. I didn't sleep that night, and we left early in the morning. Later, I asked my uncle and cousins if they'd ever had any weird visits there. They told me the only person who ever visits is a neighbor who, when drunk, would just grab one of the old recliners and sleep until he sobered up. Now every year my friends talk about spending another weekend there, but I always make up an excuse, so we never go through that again. They never knew what actually happened. Story 3. It was the summer of 2014, and I was bored and home alone, so naturally I hopped on CS:GO. I went to Dust Online to play some casual. It wasn't a very busy lobby. There were about 5 people on each side. I joined the terrorists, where I quickly discovered the only other person with a mic was a guy whose name was something like Smarties McFlurry. He sounded a lot older than me. I was 14 at the time. His name was Dave, and we got along well. We played well together, since we had the same skill level. We eventually played more CS:GO together, and then friended each other on Steam. After that, he asked for some of my social media, and I gave him my Discord and Snapchat. Later, on CS:GO, Dave suddenly said he had to leave and that we could play more tomorrow. I got off, watched some TV, and eventually fell asleep on the couch. I was home alone for the night. Around 1 a.m., I woke up to get a glass of water. Then, I heard a Snapchat notification from my phone. Curious as to who was sending snaps at this time of night, I picked it up and saw it was from Dave. I opened it, and it was a picture of my front lawn and house. The phone and the glass of water fell from my hands to the floor, and my heart began to race. I was suddenly frozen, as if rooted to the spot. The darkness around me seemed to become thicker. I swear I was seeing shadows all around me. Then I heard a knock at the glass. I turned to the back window, and there he was, Dave, who looked a lot older and creepier than I remembered. Without thinking, I ran to the back door and locked it. I also locked the front door. I could hear him calling to me through the window. I proceeded to run to the only windowless room, the bathroom. I stayed in there for about an hour, shaking and fearing the worst. I dreaded hearing the sound of Dave calling me again, a knock at the door, or even footsteps outside. I don't know how long it was before I fell asleep. The next morning, my parents arrived home, and I hesitated to tell them about my experience. I knew they would lecture me, but it wasn't just that. I was questioning whether or not I was dreaming when Dave appeared at my house. I knew I had not been dreaming when I was playing CS:GO with him though. However, when I checked my phone, it was like he didn't exist. It was not on my friends list in CS:GO. His Steam account was gone. His Discord was gone. And even his Snapchat was gone. All deleted. And to this day, I still question my sanity about whether or not this Dave guy, who I played CS:GO with, really existed. I know for sure we had chatted on the game, on Discord, and on Snapchat. But had he really come to my house? Why were all his online accounts deleted? I really don't know. Story 4. Around 9 years ago, my boyfriend, now husband, and I were driving across the country from California to Florida. My husband had this enormous Rottweiler named Kuma. I had only just met Kuma maybe 2 days prior, since my husband and I were in a long-distance relationship at the time. So Kuma and I didn't really know each other well yet. But he was a great boy and talked a lot. We called him Humble Grumbles. On this trip, we stopped at a gas station so that we could all get out, stretch, and use the bathroom. My husband got Kuma on his leash and said he was going to take him for a walk. I offered to do it instead, since I didn't need to use the restroom urgently. Now, I'm not a small girl. I'm 5'10", but petite as my husband calls me, maybe 125 pounds. My husband, on the other hand, is 6'5" and built like a Viking, so Doc Kuma's size wouldn't affect him one way or the other if he tried to bolt, chasing a squirrel or something. I, on the other hand, will admit I was nervous. Once he handed me the leash, if Kuma decided to try anything, I definitely wasn't big or strong enough to stop him. My husband noticed my nervousness, and he just smiled and said, "Don't worry, he's well trained. He won't take off, and he will not let anything happen to you." It's important to note that Kuma had no formal training. He just loved whatever his dad did, and he knew he was supposed to protect and keep it safe when his dad wasn't there to do it himself. Once he was sure I was comfortable, my husband then headed inside, leaving Kuma and me near the far right of the gas station with a little dirt path near a wooded area. It was very dark, and there was little light being shed so far from the building, but it was a busy little station, and I could see people, so I didn't feel isolated or anything. I started to walk slowly, allowing Kuma to take in his surroundings when I heard a noise coming from behind me. I turned, startled, to see a man walking. He noticed me and slowed his gaze, looked around, then back at me, and smiled eerily. He then changed direction, suddenly heading directly toward me. He said, "It's awful dangerous out here all alone. Are you all alone?" Something in his eyes told me to run. Just as I was about to bolt and start hustling towards the people and the lights of the gas station, I heard another sound, and this one was new to me. As I clenched my hand, preparing to run or fight, I felt something. The leash. Kuma. In that moment, I'd completely forgotten that I wasn't all alone, and not by a long shot. The sound I heard was a warning, and a very lethal one. It was the deepest, most menacing growl I'd ever heard come out of anything. That beautiful beast stepped out from behind me, where he had been observing the threat, like a giant dragon rising from the shadows. The man's creepy smile slipped right off his face, as did a few shades of color. Kuma placed his large body between mine and the approaching stranger and pressed back against me, urging me toward the jeep. You didn't have to tell me twice. I turned and started to make my way back to the car, still holding that leash for dear life. He walked backward, pressing against me the entire time, watching my back until we made it back to where we had parked. I tried to look for the man, but he either ran back to wherever he had come from or somehow made it inside, taking a much longer route and well outside of Kumar's reach. I told my husband about what happened, and honestly, I'm not sure who would have done more damage to that unfortunate man had they located him. Every day for the next 9 years, Kumar was my best friend and my guardian.